The doorbell rings, and something inside you drops. Not a little, all the way down. Your body tightens before your brain has even fully processed who it could possibly be. You were not expecting anyone. You were not warned. You were not given the chance to prepare, to shift gears, to mentally transition from the private version of yourself to the version that knows how to be in a room with another person without it costing something. And now, there is a person, a real physical human being, standing on the other side of your front door, about to enter the one space in the entire world where you were finally allowed to just exist without performing, without managing, without being anything for anyone at all. Here is why understanding that reaction matters far more than most people ever stop to consider. The way you respond to unexpected visitors is not a personality quirk or a casual preference for quiet evenings. It is a precise psychological signal about how your nervous system has learned to protect your most fundamental internal resource, your private self. People who carry this pattern often misread their own relationships, exhaust themselves socially in ways they genuinely cannot explain, and quietly build lives that feel smaller and more restricted than they ever consciously intended. If the sound of your own doorbell produces something closer to dread than curiosity, something closer to violation than welcome, this is going to explain exactly what that feeling is constructed from, where it came from originally, and why it has been sitting inside you far longer than you probably ever realized. There is a word people use for this. They call it antisocial. They say it with a mild but unmistakable judgment attached, like something in this person did not develop correctly. Like warmth toward others is the automatic baseline, and anything measurably below it is a deficiency that needs to be identified and corrected. The person who does not want visitors gets labeled as cold, as difficult, as a homebody in the slightly dismissive way that word sometimes gets used in conversation. Their family members take the closed door personally. Their friends eventually stop coming by and eventually stop mentioning that they stopped. And the person themselves often internalizes the label so completely over so many years of having it reflected back at them that they stop questioning whether the label was ever accurate in the first place. What rarely gets said, what almost never gets said, is this: not wanting people to show up unannounced at your home is not the same thing as not caring about people. The two experiences are completely separate, and the intensity of the reaction, the physical spike, the low-grade resentment, the way an unexpected knock at the door can derail an entire afternoon that was going perfectly fine. That intensity is not an overreaction. It is information. It is pointing directly at something real. Something that has absolutely nothing to do with whether this person is warm or cold, socially capable or incapable, good at relationships or fundamentally broken at them. What we are actually talking about is a specific and deeply documented psychological experience that researchers in environmental psychology, introversion science, and sensory processing sensitivity have studied carefully for decades, and that almost nobody explains correctly to the people who are living inside it every single day. The psychology of people who hate visitors and dread the sound of the doorbell is not about hating people. It is about something far more precise and far more personal. The relationship between psychological safety, the concept of private space, and the way certain nervous systems experience unscheduled intrusion versus a chosen invitation. There is far more happening underneath that doorbell reaction than simple irritability or personal preference. And most people who carry it have spent years wondering why the feeling is so disproportionate to the actual event without ever having it named in a way that felt genuinely true. In environmental psychology, the concept of home as a psychological sanctuary is well established and extensively documented across decades of residential research. Studies on residential attachment found that for a significant portion of the population, the home functions not simply as a physical structure where daily life happens, but as a core psychological container. A place where the self is allowed to exist without external regulation, without performance demands, without the constant low-level management that social life requires. For these individuals, the home is not just where they live and sleep. It is specifically where they decompress from the ongoing and very real psychological cost of social existence. It is where the managed, carefully calibrated version of themselves finally gets to clock out and stop working. When someone rings that doorbell unannounced, they are not just requesting physical entry to a house. They are interrupting an active recovery process. They are inserting an unscheduled social demand directly into the one environment that was specifically and deliberately constructed to be free from social demands. And the body, which does not cleanly distinguish between a physical threat and a significant psychological one when the perceived stakes feel high enough, responds accordingly and immediately. Cortisol rises, the muscles tighten, the jaw sets, the breath shortens slightly. That entire sequence is not an overreaction to a doorbell. That is a nervous system executing exactly the response it was carefully trained to produce in exactly the category of situation it was trained over years to flag as a threat. Research on sensory processing sensitivity, developed extensively by psychologist Elaine Aron at the State University of New York through decades of clinical observation and testing, identified that approximately 15 to 20% of the population processes environmental and social stimulation significantly more deeply than the general average. These individuals, commonly referred to as highly sensitive people, experience social interaction at a meaningfully higher physiological cost than most people around them ever recognize or acknowledge. They enjoy genuine connection. They value relationships that matter to them, but they recover from social contact differently, more slowly, and with greater need for controlled solitude afterward. An uncontrolled, unscheduled social contact lands in their system with an intensity that people outside that 15 to 20% often find genuinely difficult to imagine or fully believe. This did not arrive fully formed in adulthood. For most people carrying this pattern, the original architecture was built early, in childhood environments where privacy was scarce or completely non-existent, where the home itself was unpredictable, where the arrival of other people reliably and repeatedly meant the end of whatever quiet or safety had existed before they appeared. Maybe it was a household where relatives or neighbors were constantly dropping by without warning and the entire atmosphere shifted the moment they arrived. Maybe it was a home where the presence of certain people reliably meant tension that expanded to fill every room and left no space to breathe. Maybe it was simply growing up as a highly sensitive child in an environment that never once acknowledged that sensitivity as legitimate, which trained the child to absorb the full social cost quietly and recover alone in their room because nobody around them seemed to need or understand the same thing. The nervous system, as it always does, took careful notes across all of those years. It built a durable association between unannounced presence and the end of safety, between the doorbell and the beginning of depletion, between the arrival of other people and the disappearance of the only space that ever truly belonged to the self. And a nervous system that learns that association deeply enough does not simply forget it when the childhood environment is eventually left behind. It carries it forward. It keeps the door locked not out of hostility toward the people on the other side, but out of a protection instinct that was earned through real and repeated experience. This deserves to be said plainly and without softening. This is not a character flaw. It is not emotional damage requiring repair before a person can be considered whole or capable of healthy connection. And it is not superior to the experience of someone who genuinely loves a surprise visit, who feels energized by the spontaneous arrival of someone they care about, who hears the doorbell as a simple and uncomplicated invitation. Both experiences are grounded in real neurological differences in how people process social and sensory stimulation. Neither response is the correct one. Different nervous systems, shaped by different early environments, arrived at different relationships with the concept of home, privacy, and unscheduled contact. There is no hierarchy in that observation. There is only the observation itself. Here is the layer that almost no one reaches. People who protect their home space with this kind of intensity are very often among the most genuinely present, attentive, and deeply connected people in any relationship when the conditions feel right. Because they do not distribute social energy across a wide and indiscriminate surface, what they offer when they choose to offer it tends to carry unusual weight and authenticity. They are not performing warmth across every interaction. They are delivering it in full concentration to the specific people in carefully chosen moments they have decided are worth it. The quiet cost of this is that people who love them sometimes experience the boundary as rejection when it was never personal at all. The hidden strength is that when this person genuinely opens the door on their own terms, what enters the room with them is rarely surface level. If you recognize yourself in any part of this, here is what is simply and plainly true. You are not broken. You are not cold. You are not failing at being a person who connects meaningfully with other people. You built a system that protected something genuinely worth protecting. Your ability to recover, to exist without performance, to be the unmanaged version of yourself in at least one space in the world. That system did exactly what it was built to do. The fact that it sometimes fires even when the person at the door is someone you genuinely love is not evidence of malfunction. It is evidence of a pattern that was written before you had the language or the awareness to examine it or decide whether you still needed it. If you want to create a little more ease inside this pattern without dismantling the parts of it that genuinely serve you, here is the one shift that actually moves something real. Start separating the visit itself from the absence of warning. The next time someone you genuinely want in your space reaches out, invite them on your terms. Name a time that works for you. Name a rough duration if that helps your system settle. Give the visit a container with visible edges that your nervous system can see and trust. What you are training your brain to understand is that connection on your terms is not the same threat as connection that arrives without warning. Predictability is the variable that changes everything. You are not becoming more open by tolerating more surprise. You are becoming more open by showing your nervous system, one chosen visit at a time, that you are the one holding the door. If this reached something real in you, there is more worth understanding about how your need for controlled space shapes the relationships you choose, the environments where you slowly suffocate versus genuinely thrive, and what happens to your sense of self when the boundaries you built get crossed repeatedly without acknowledgement or understanding. That architecture runs quietly through more of your daily experience than most of the people closest to you will ever fully see. Understanding it yourself, clearly, honestly, and without the weight of shame, is where everything else begins to shift.